Good morning, everybody. I have the great pleasure of opening the day today. My name is Kate Nash. I am Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Cultures at the University of Leeds and Associate Professor in the School of Media and Communication. I was involved in organising the summit on the Leeds side, although I will absolutely confess from the get-go that my great colleague Chris Erickson did way more of the heavy lifting, so a huge thanks to Chris. But I'm still going to claim the pleasure today of welcoming you virtually to day 2 of the Media Education Summit. I did a quick and almost certainly inaccurate head count of where delegates are based. And I think we have around 23 countries represented from just about every kind of corner of the world. So wherever you are and whatever time zone you are in, thank you very much for being here. It's really, really wonderful to have you with us. It's also really fantastic to see teachers, practitioners and academics from across a number of fields coming together to explore what are really clearly increasingly urgent questions. So this is the first Media Education Summit to be focused around a theme: media education, diversity and voice. It's a theme that we decided on quite a while ago, before the murder of George Floyd, well before the UK government declared that there is no structural racism, before the murder of Sarah Everard reminded us yet again, as though we needed that reminder, of the daily reality of violence against women, and way before any of us had heard of COVID-19 or could begin to imagine how our lives could be so completely transformed. In reflecting on the impacts of COVID, British-Turkish writer Elif Shafak describes some message boards that she began to see quite randomly springing up in parks across London during the first phase of the lockdown. When this is all over, the boards asked, how do you want the world to be different? And of all the comments, Shafik was drawn to one: when all this is over, I want to live in a different world where I can be heard. This simple plea to speak and to be heard, delivered via a very non-digital, very low-tech platform, reminds us of how central voice is to the human concept of the good life and how it takes on particular urgency at moments of crisis. It reminds us too of the profound inequalities of speaking and listening. Who's listening to this lone plea for voice? As media practitioners, educators, scholars, we're very much aware of these inequalities in the media industries, in the academy, in public communication. But as we've already been hearing in the conference, this moment of transition surfaces questions about voice in new ways. There are questions about the inequalities of digital access that we considered in Esther's keynote note last night, and important questions to ask about misinformation, about community, civic society, and collective agency. And as I look at the topics for discussion today, it's really fantastic to see these conversations taking shape. So I would just like to thank you all again for being here and thank everybody involved in organising the conference. And I'd just like to briefly introduce our chair for this morning's session, Mita Ladd. Mita is an associate professor, Mita, in media at Middlesex University. Associate lecturer in. I just gave you a nice big promotion, Emmy.
I was going to say, no, lecturer.
Go with that. And her research focuses on diasporic television audiences in the UK. She's doing a number of papers at the moment, right-wing Hindu nationalist ideologies within primetime soap operas, which I'm really looking forward to finding out more about. And she is also the chair of the Meccsa Race, Ethnicity and Post-Colonial Network. So over to you, Mita.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you for that introduction. So as Kate mentioned, I don't know if, because we've got so many delegates from around the world. So I'm just wanting to kind of reiterate what Kate said about yesterday. The UK government's commissioned report on race disparity was published. And according to that, there is no racism. So we're all fine. We're all good. So if that's what you're here to talk about, there's no problem. There isn't a problem. So, we can all go home. But saying that, why do I feel really worried? Why do I feel anxious for making such a comment on this platform that I have? Why am I so very, very, very careful of what I say because of potential repercussions? Because I am actively exposing myself in this arena. If British institutions were not racist, I would not feel like this. So what I'm saying is that we need to carry on these discussions, carry on talking and doing the work that we're doing. And this is what this panel is hopefully going to continue, well, is going to do. And I'm hoping that the panels throughout this day and going forward will continue to do as well. Because we've not gone home and there is so much more that needs to be done. So this morning session is going to be divided into three. The first part will be a conversation about experiences of media education from a couple of different perspectives, as well as suggestions going forward as to what more can be done around diversity. And these are kind of suggestions that are coming through lived experience and practice. So the conversation will be with myself and my co-panelists, Dr. Ahmet Atay, who is Associate Professor of Worcester College in Ohio. Ahmet's research focuses on diasporic experiences and cultural identity formations, political and social complexities of city life, such as immigrant and queer experiences. And then my other panelist is Brian Copper, who is a teacher, senior leader and former head of department for media and film studies, who works in a sixth form college here in the UK. Brian has over 20 years of experience teaching and has taught both academic and vocational students. Brian has also been a senior examiner for media studies and has delivered lots of media CPD to schools and colleges. Brian's broad interests are around subjects around media representations, issues relating to diversity, both in the production of media and how people, places and events are represented. The second part will be a screening, and I will hand over to Dr. Beth Johnson to introduce that part, and then we'll come together after the screening to discuss what's mentioned in the screening, the ideas and the kind of comments that we've brought up as the panel, but we will also open it up to the floor for questions at that point as well. So that's kind of how the running order of this morning panel will work. And so essentially we're kind of, the first part is going to be a conversation. There's no PowerPoints or anything to kind of share. And we just want this to be a space a safe space, and this is what's really got to be important here. This has got to be a safe space. Someone like me has to feel safe that I can, share an experience with you without repercussions, that there'll be allyship here. And, this is kind of, what happened yesterday is kind of really made me really keenly aware of this need for spaces and need for conversations like this to continue. So I'd like to kind of also bring in my co-panelists, Ahmet and Brian now, and first of all, maybe ask them, what are your experiences of media education? What are your experiences of media education? Ahmet, would you like to come in?
Sure. Well, thank you, first of all, inviting me to be on this panel, Mita. It is 4:15 a.m. in Ohio time, so I am diligent and very committed to both media education and the subject in hand, which is diversity, and if you will, equity and access. Let me start with my journey. I became a media student at the age of 17 in Istanbul, Turkey, before I came to the US for a master's program, originally from Cyprus. And therefore I have been living an immigrant life or an international student life really a really long time, and then of course an international faculty life for another decade. So media education or media studies has been my lifeline, and therefore because of who I am as an immigrant, because of the types of things I was interested in as somebody who identifies as queer and, you know, in a very transnational manner, somebody who belongs to the US and the continent Europe as well simultaneously, I came to this topic with a couple of different lenses, couple of different ideas. And since then, I completed my PhD at the SIU Southern Illinois University and became a faculty member who is extremely tuned in with this idea of diversity and what does it mean to live with that, but also teach it in the classroom when probably not that many people wants to often hear about or very much interested in. So I have been teaching courses ranging from media, society, and culture to mediated race, gender, and sexuality to transnational queer cinema to which I am about to embark next semester, global advertising, looking at the media from a very larger, very global transnational perspective. Hence, I really also been very invested in diversity conversation over the last decade at my own home institution, which is a liberal arts university with tiny student body of 2,000, but also in the US regional and national conferences where we focus on diversity and inclusivity. More like, you know, this conversation, we just completed one where I am the vice president of the second vice president of the Central States Communication Association, where we really focused on this very issue only a week ago. So therefore, I want to come to this conversation with an eye on what does diversity mean. Obviously, it means totally different things to the US audience or US scholars and media practitioners to maybe to UK or the European or the rest of the world. But we are really talking about a couple of essential things, which is diverse identities in terms of race and ethnicity, in terms of disability, gender, sexuality, class, and obviously this notion of identity in a national, national markations. And of course, all of those when those are intersectional and in dialogue with one another. I want to also come to this conversation with an argument that what we do, media studies or the film studies, what we teach, media and film, can indeed create a social change. Right at the end, in the heart of this is we are going out to persuade the people to do something, and hopefully it will be something good in terms of tuning into understanding the difference and also respecting and embodying the difference in many shapes and forms. So what I'm also going to engage with today's discussion is very much so impacted and troubled by the Trump administration that we lived through for 4 years in the US, and some of the discussions that you are heavily embedded in with Brexit, very, very similar context in terms of the stance that politicians have been taking, or the larger populist body or the media is taking against the difference. So that's my brief introduction. Thank you, Mita.
Thanks, Ahmet. Brian.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you very much, and thank you, Mita, for inviting me onto this panel, your panel. It's a great thrill and great honour to be with you guys on this one. Following Ahmet there, really impressive, obviously in terms of academia, but also in terms of life story, and also really impressive that it's 4 a.m. roundabouts in the US, and Ahmet's here with us, which is absolutely brilliant. I can only, if you like, kind of combat that, Ahmet, by saying it's 9:20 here in East Manchester, and so I'm not feeling quite maybe so tired. As Mita said in the general introduction, yeah, my name is Brian Copper, and I'm one of the senior leadership team in a sixth form college in East Manchester. in England, and we're based. We've got about 2,000 students here, and in terms of the FE world, we do offer that mixture of A-level and vocational experience to our students, who then will go on to university, hopefully, and will want to further their studies. The significance about where we're based is that we have some of the poorest, if we put it in that context, poorest postcodes in the UK, where we are based, and we have a really big sort of diverse populace of students and community, which is absolutely lovely, and it means that we have a fantastic community at the college. And really interestingly, I think what I've been struck by is that we in sixth form and in FE are a little more restrained perhaps, and a little more constricted by curriculum. We often get given prescribed texts that are given to us, and prescribed theorists, who I want to kind of talk about a little bit as the discussion goes on, who, if I'm perfectly honest, don't offer diversity. And we don't hear diverse voices from the very text that we are ultimately told to teach and told to study. And I don't want to, at the same time, I don't want to be an apologist or be that person that does nothing about that. It's in many respects from an FE perspective, and I'm sure I've got colleagues that are teaching FE out there today at the conference. Sometimes there is great frustration, I feel, in our sector, because we don't get to look at and potentially to choose how we want to shape our teaching. That can bring its real frustrations and I think real problems. And one of the big things for me is that I think currently we are seeing, and I know this is perhaps a little early for me to bring this in, but I'm going to say it, I think there are huge gaps in our education system as we speak now. And it's not to do with qualification. Qualification and education, I know this is something that's been discussed and debated many times, and it may be you thinking, well, this is a really obvious thing to say, Brian, but actually the qualification and the actual education are so separate. Myself and a number of colleagues, not only in my own college, but I think across the country, when I've been on CPD events and led CPD events and been to examining events, I've also kind of experienced this frustration, and we are guided by certain things and certain structures, and a number of those structures don't recognise or represent the diverse. And so that's very much my angle today when we have these discussions, thinking about, if you like, some of the nuts and bolts relating to FE and how that can then change, because it's brilliant that in HE, those discussions and that curricula can be kind of like designed in such a way that we can celebrate that. But in a way, if we're not doing it from an early stage, then that can be a dreadful catch up for a lot of students, and a really, really tricky time for people to then be able to synthesize that information. I take my hat off to our colleagues in primary, because I really think in primary education in this country, they too being restricted by curriculum, maybe even more so, but their focus and their attempts to engage all young people and to try and engage all young people in different and diverse conversations is really good. But then I feel that there's a dip between there sometimes and then moving into HE, purely for the fact that not because of colleagues' faults in that respect, but because of the issues that we face, I think, in battling time and the ideas of curriculum. So that's what I'm quite interested in today and think about discussing. So thanks, Mita. Back to you.
No, thanks, Brian. So I think this is there's so many areas that we can talk about. Like Brian mentioned, the dictated, the curriculum that they can teach is dictated to by the exam boards. But then I also think about my own students who, if they were going on to do, I teach a foundation level at Middlesex and in media, and if they're going on to do film or television, they're not going to see another lecturer of colour on a full-time permanent basis. They might see guest speakers, but they're not going to see, you know, after their foundation for the next 3 years, they're not going to see someone like me. So there's and then there's the curriculum itself, you know, like how can we think about, diversifying the curriculum. Then we look at the student body and think about how diverse they are as well. Then there's kind of our managers and our managers' managers, and so there's all these different areas that I feel need to be talked about and discussed. My own experience of media education started at an FE level. Julian was my BTEC lecturer, so this is how long I've known Julian. We're both 25, so it's fine. So that's when it started, and ever since I've been doing media, working within a university sector, by and large, I've always been pretty much the only face of colour. You're welcome, Julian. I've pretty much got used to being the only face of colour in these places. And for a long time, I thought that was, oh, it's fine. I don't feel any prejudice coming towards me. But then I kind of realized that, no, this isn't all right. This isn't how the world is. This isn't how, why should I be used to this? And I kind of, it was an epiphany that came to me that I've got to be the change. I've got to start questioning it. I've got to start agitating. I've got to start thinking and pulling up other people, my friends and colleagues who are academics of colour or colleagues of colour, friends of colour who are creatives, to kind of give, if I get a platform, why not? And this is why I also thought it was really important to get an FE perspective, because I feel as though a lot of the discussions that are going around at the moment are very much focused in HE. It might be partly because that's the sector I'm in, but I also feel as though, well, these students that we teach at HE are coming from somewhere, particularly here in the UK. And so we need to kind of, have a look at an FE section as well. So I kind of want to think about what are we doing? Ahmet, like you've already mentioned that, you're teaching things like transnational cinema and, those kinds of modules. But what else are you doing at the moment? What kind of practices are you implementing in your teaching, in your research, that we can share with the rest of the summit here, the delegates here, that they might then go forward and start implementing?
Sure. This is a very good question to think about. I have been writing heavily on what does transnational or post-colonial media pedagogy or any type of communication education looks like. And obviously, we keep arriving to the same point, whoever is coming to this discussion. We got to think about the curriculum. We got to think about our own departments or programs that we are situated. We got to think about the student and faculty body that we are working with. And therefore, we have to take as a practice, as a philosophical idea, this notion of decoloniality, right? If the education system, if we see this as a colonial practice, how do you decolonize it? How do you invite spaces? How do we create spaces to invite people who are speaking with accents, look different, live their lives differently, their bodies function differently, their desires function differently? So therefore, we got to think about maybe shift the logic and look into this more carefully. So for example, the textbooks that we read, who are the authors of these textbooks? Are we only assigning readings, articles, films created by very dominant mainstream British, or in my case, US authors or scholars? So a quick pause here. I have been involved with Meccsa last 6-7 years, and I have been in as a visitor or visiting scholar where Julian is for a semester. So I have been coming to the higher education in the UK for about 7-8 years now, and I hope to return for my sabbatical in a year when everything got back to normal. So I hope to have this conversation in person at one point with you. But going back to this idea of what does decoloniality look like, we gotta shift the curriculum, the way that we design the curriculum, the way that we teach the curriculum, and who are in the conversations that we're engaging as the scholars with our students. So that's, in my mind, that's rule number one. Rule number two, or the idea number two that I am practicing, who are my students, right? I teach in the middle of Ohio, but my classroom is very global. I have students all the way from the not the state, but the country of Georgia to Vietnam, to my local students that come from a farming community, which is really 30 miles away from us. So we are looking at a very global classroom. So therefore, my goal is to make a media classes that they see themselves in the curriculum. They see their identities, their lived experiences in the type of things that I am teaching. Therefore, that means a diversification of the visual material that I introduce to the classroom. And finally, we have to think about who are the bodies, as Mita was talking about, who are the bodies teaching these classes, right? So I was in a department where I was literally the only immigrant person or transnational scholar for about a decade, maybe less than a decade, about 7-8 years. And that wasn't significant experiences, right? So therefore, if you don't have other faculty members, staff member, teaching staff member who could share your experiences, you're going to feel quite a bit siloed, very isolated. You're doing this work and lifting the work by yourself on your own. So we have to be also very mindful about the hiring practices that we do. So for example, in terms of what I do, I have been a department chair of global media and digital studies, as well as I'm chairing women's gender and sexuality studies. The searches that we did, and I chaired the searches, I made a point to hire transnational scholars who come to these conversations very, very complicated lived experiences and very high training in media or women's and gender sexuality studies. So we have to look at where are the practices that we engage in terms of the academia, right? In terms of the classroom setting, in terms of who we are putting into the classroom as students, and also the bodies who are teaching these classes, but also what type of things are we teaching these students, right? It should not be accidental that our students never read any article or watch any film that does not depict an immigrant, or does not depict a person of color, or does not depict a trans or queer identified person. So we have to be mindfully maybe decolonizing what we do in the media education.
Thanks, Hamid. Brian, I know that you mentioned that there is such restriction on the curriculum in FE, but outside the curriculum, or even within, can you kind of wing it, or can you kind of throw in some different scholarship? Can you throw in different examples? How can you, or how are you and your colleagues in FE trying to create different, not just about race. I know that we're kind of talking a lot about race here, but there is bringing in disability and sexuality and age and class, and I suppose class in Manchester might be quite a big one as well.
No, thanks, Mita. I think first of all, I wonder if you've been to one of my lessons, because I've been winging it for 20 years. But in terms of, I know what you mean, in terms of wanting to kind of like step away maybe from some of the structures, as you say, that we've got. I suppose first of all, I should say that the topics that we look at are quite diverse in some respects, and I certainly don't want to be kind of sort of wagging my finger necessarily at the exam boards, but I think I think there is something in as much that, you know, the very foundation, if you like, of media studies, particular A level, if you look at it at the advanced level, just to give you if I can, a tally. I looked yesterday at the 13, we've got 13 prescribed theorists that we have to look at in media studies A level. 3 of those theorists out of the 13 are Black or Asian, and 2 are women. So out of that gives you just some raw data, if you want to put it like that, in terms of where we're looking. So we are talking about, you know, looking at semiotics, for example, we're talking about Barthes. You're talking about narratology, you're looking at Svets and Todorov. You're looking at genre theory, you're looking at Steve Neal. All of which, you know, brilliant academics, fantastic people in their own right. But it goes on, you come to representation, and obviously, you know, got great Stuart Hall in there. It's absolutely fantastic. But, you know, he's one author, he's one academic, he's one voice in this huge melting pot of what, frankly, is white European blokes. And, you know, there isn't that. I don't think there's been much change. And I know in the past, Mita, we've had a brief conversation about it in the past, that I feel in a way that sometimes we're not progressive enough, and that in a way, when I think back to the old specification or the old specification, there was some more freedom in there to be able to explore and to talk about other people. So I would, for example, look at those structured texts and then say, yes, but have you looked at, for example, Bell Hooks, you know, he's an alternative voice, you know, her 1981 book on Ain't I a Woman, for example, or even, you know, going back even further, but talking about Simone de Beauvoir, we're talking about gender, obviously, and, you know, all of those things. And those texts aren't on the specification in many respects. And so you do look at that sometimes and think, well, where is the voice? Where's the academic voice, which then allows people who are diverse within the classroom? You know, where is what becomes that? Where's their agency? Where's their link? Where's their buy-in? And should it also be about just those people? Should it not be that everybody within that classroom should be educated in a way that we're going, you know what, this is holistic kind of, you know, focus. And I was reading the report that you were talking about earlier at the start of this yesterday, and then obviously was looking at the reaction from Runnymede and what have you, and almost that kind of denial of different diverse voices that we've had in history and the context of history. You know, one of those, just picking up this historic figures like Queen Charlotte, for example, you know, a queen that was, you know, mixed race, but it's, where is that in history? Where's that? Who talks about that? And I said at the start of this, you know, I don't want to come across as an apologist, because I can be guilty of that too, because, you know, I know that colleagues will talk about time constraints and talk about the difficulties in kind of going outside of the curriculum or going outside of a set structure because we've got exams to meet. But as I said at the top, I honestly think that, you know, we do have a problem in as much that, you know, there's a difference here between education and the qualification. And I don't think we've got the balance right. Ahmet mentioned as well about sort of the Trumpism, you know, element, which is, you know, been horrendous, obviously, in America, but for the world, in as much that it really feels like that report yesterday was a hangover from that to me. And I don't, obviously, I mustn't get, you know, boiled down into politics here today, but it's all part and parcel, isn't it, of those different voices and of those different things that are going forward. So in short, is there a short here? I suppose with my students, I'm just trying to encourage them to say, you know, have a look at other things, have a look at other stuff, try and take yourself out of your norm, try and take yourself out of what you considered your structured reality. When they question things or when they look at things, think about it from, if you can, try and strip away the whitewash, or try and strip away the focus that's been placed upon you since birth about where you've gone with some of this debate and this conversation, and try and think about it from a different voice to give you, hopefully, that understanding and that agency. And the other thing is as well, it can be a little more difficult in FE because you've got to be a little bit careful, obviously, in terms of not putting people on the spot, not upsetting people, we've got safeguarding concerns as we all have, but to also ask people if they are willing, and you make the right approach to those people to talk about their experiences, if they come from a different and diverse background, whether that be sexuality, whether that might be gender, whether that might be race or ethnicity. And that exploration and then that first-hand kind of like understanding. And in a place like East Manchester, we're lucky because, again, we are in such a wonderful, fruitful kind of community. We are, and we can get those voices. And if people are prepared to talk about that, and you said it, Mita, that whole thing about if people can talk and challenge, then we are heading to a better place. And so myself, colleagues, and I know colleagues up and down the land will want and try and do that as well. That's what the nature of teaching, lecturing, is all about. But it's hard sometimes, and we've got to try and break some of the constraints based around us and break away from that. So yeah, I don't know if that answers anything, Mita, but that's my perspective.
No, that's really good, because I think that what that leads on to, it got me thinking about how I'm still, because it's almost kind of like I'm through my experiences, even I can't see where the challenge needs to happen sometimes. I kind of what's the word? I don't see the problems, and so, or not that there isn't a problem, or I'm almost kind of institutionalized in a way that I don't see the problems, therefore I don't call it out. And it's only after the fact that I'm like, oh, wait a second, that should have happened. So even I'm still trying to get out of this system that I've kind of been educated in and that I've been working in for so long as well. So even I'm kind of, still learning, still reading, still, learning about kind of new scholarship and the academics that are out there, either established or, kind of coming through at the moment. But I kind of wanted to just, because I'm conscious of time, and but I just wanted to kind of ask or think about, how can our colleagues be an ally? How can our colleagues be allies? What can they do? Ahmet, you talked about being alone and being a silo in your department at Worcester College for a while. How were your colleagues kind of an ally to you, and what suggestions could we throw out to our co-delegates and say, check up on your friends and colleagues in your departments, even admin, even the technicians, check up on them. Are they okay? Are they having problems? Are they having issues? If you're at a conference such as this, and if it's, in person, go to the person who stood there by themselves that doesn't have their network, because, this is the first time they've ever attended a conference. Go up to them, talk to them, introduce yourself. I think that was one of the most daunting things when I started my PhD, going to a conference and just stood there and kind of what do I do? Don't know anyone. How do I talk to someone? I ended up just standing next to the coffee, and every time someone came over, I'd just say hi, or oh, the coffee's nice, or something. And then just trying to kind of, it took a lot of effort. I'd have to kind of go oh, is this person looks nice, right? Okay, maybe try them, go. But and then later on, one of my supervisors was at a conference with me. She started introducing me to people. What other things can happen? Ahmet.
Sure. I have three interrelated thoughts about this one. And let me start with an anecdote that just happened this particular Saturday, past Saturday. As I was articulating earlier, I was at a conference, and there was two sessions, and the first one was really about the international faculties who are teaching in communication and media studies department. What does it mean to be in the academia as these accented bodies, or bodies that come with quite a bit of immigration issues? There were 11, 12 speakers in the very large panel. We had 3 audience members, and none of them was, mainstream white US American bodies there. So therefore, such questions, such experiences begs the question: who is interested in the lives of the faculty or students who are marginalized in the mainstream? If the scholars are not coming to hear the experiences or the challenges, how does then the allyship works, right? So that brings that, the discussion to my second question, second maybe issue. There is what I want to talk about, a real allyship that people are inherently interested in and committed to work at a better environment that is tuned in with diversity and transnationality, the global nature of what we do, and practices what they preach, really to a degree that that's the DNA of what they do, versus people who does that purely for performative reasons to gain cultural capital from the other scholars. So there are two different types of an allyship that I'm looking at or seeing. One, people are committed. Two is purely for the sake of performance, right? And that is very dangerous. That is the type of allyship that we don't need, we don't want, because that is going to cause the most damage on a very already marginalized sections or the sectors of the media education or the student body that we are engaging with, right? And this maybe the third the goal that we have to work with, this idea of, I'm borrowing this from a more of a political arena, a grand coalition, right? You have to work as historically marginalized bodies, come together with your allies to create waves, right? And the work that you are going to engage with is, let me tell you, it's difficult. There are times that I work in these particular arenas in terms of diversification. I come home exhausted, because pushing the boundaries, making ways to create a positive change, it's hard. And when other people pushing you back, that becomes harder. So you need that grand coalition that are committed, allies, and people are from the historically marginalized communities are coming together to it together. Otherwise, it's going to be a burden on the diverse bodies who are already carrying the burden on the ground.
Thank you, Ahmet. Brian, sorry, I'm just conscious of chat time, and I want to get this screening in as well. So maybe we can come back to this and other discussions after the screening. So what I'd like to do now is hand over to Dr. Beth Johnson, who's the Associate Professor at the University of Leeds and is the EDI lead of Screen Industries Growth Network, to introduce the next part of the discussion. Or the session, sorry.
Thanks very much, Mita, and thanks also to the MES 2021 organising team for inviting me to talk about and share one of the films in the Industry Voices research-led film series with you today. I'm going to start sharing my screen now, so hopefully you'll be able to see that in just a moment. Okay. Okay, are colleagues able to see that?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Okay, so before I share this research-led film with you, I wanted to briefly talk about the Industry Voices initiative and explain something of the context from which the film series emerged. Okay, so I'm going to just take a couple of minutes to do this before the screening starts. So Industry Voices was an initiative that started in March 2020, days prior to the COVID-19 pandemic fully hitting the UK and the first lockdown that happened. At that time, I just started leading EDI work for the Screen Industries Growth Network, which is a UKRI funded project on screen industry growth in the region of Yorkshire and the Humber in the UK. The pandemic very quickly, of course, created a crisis in nearly all areas of the industry. But before it hit, a crisis or a virus was already very much present. And that was one of inequality, discrimination, and exclusion. So as scholars such as Marcus Ryder, Meccsa, Clive Nwonka, Shelley Cobb, Dave O'Brien, Sarita Malik, and many others have evidenced, the screen industries are significantly unequal, and inequalities in terms of race, gender, ethnicity, social class, disability are seemingly and sadly entrenched. Meritocracy, as Joe Littler argues, is very much a myth. The murder of George Floyd in May last year and the power of the Black Lives Matter movement led to, if you'll remember, a swathe of media companies and indeed educational institutions posting public messages recognising inequalities and committing to change. It also led to some UK screen industry professionals talking often on social media about their experiences of barriers and discrimination. And one such example was TV production manager Richie West. I popped a link into his Twitter here, and you can see some of the text behind. I'll see if this will, okay. It's saying that this won't screen share. Okay, bear with me. I'll go back to the main screen. I'll pop that link in the chat so colleagues are able to see that. Okay. Can I just check, Mita? Can you still see my slides?
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, thank you. That storytelling is central to social justice, to humanity, to identity, to change, is not, I imagine, an argument that I need to labour here, but it was human stories, powerful, thought-provoking, generative, that I wanted to centre in the creation of the film series. Okay. When I sort of began to conceptualize the series last June, I worked with a colleague, Wendy Sissons, who was the operations lead for the EDI workstream, and also Screen Industries professionals to plan and think through the aims of what we wanted the films to do. What is the work that we want these films to do, and what do we want to do as a group? Well, we wanted to work with the industry to create a series of research-led films for the industry. We were absolutely determined to centre lived experience in the films. And we wanted to create stories to offer a human entry point to really powerful equality, diversity and inclusion statistics around the screen industries. We wanted to be attentive to film, television and games as industries across the film series. Due to the geographical scope of SIGN, we wanted to sign the Screen Industries Growth Network. We wanted to ensure that at least half of the contributors, as a minimum, lived and worked, or lived or worked in Yorkshire and the Humber, but not ignore, obviously, the wider UK experiences and ecosystem. Really importantly, we wanted an intersectional approach, and we wanted the films to surface the intersectional barriers and discrimination that people were experiencing, these professionals across the screen industries. We wanted to provide a platform to amplify the voices of these industry professionals, but also a place from which the public, the industry could really listen, okay, picking up on Ivan's keynote yesterday, And also we wanted to engage with and in national debates and groups and campaigns. So for example, the TV coalition, Black Lives Matter, Raising Films, Be Inclusive, Share My Telly Job, and many, many others. So how did we do it? Well, working with some colleagues, John Swords and Anna Ozimek, we identified key themes from both existing and in progress research around experiences of inequality and exclusion in the screen industries. We recruited contributors, industry professionals who wanted and felt able to speak out. Last year and continuing, and for a long time, you know, what's happening in the world is really traumatizing. So we wanted to ensure that the contributors, the people speaking in these films, felt able to do that and wanted to do that. It was really important to work with a production company, you know, a regional production company, who were invested, genuinely invested in equality, diversity and inclusion, who had experience and a really strong reputation for caring for their contributors, who had high production values, who had experience of working respectfully on difficult issues. And Canada also worked on a not-for-profit basis, which also helped to ensure that we could get the funding for the filming and get these films and stories out into the world. We worked with a diverse team: Sally Ogden, Harry Locke, Sema Basharan, Kudsi Chinamberi, Lydia Noakes, Anna Hall. We filmed across September and October in 2020, and there were 3 stages of interviews for all the contributors. And by interviews, I'm not just talking about the you know, sort of interviews for, as in interviews for a job. I'm talking about qualitative interviews. And part of that was exploring if people wanted to do this, if we felt that it would cause any harm, if they felt it would cause any harm to them as well. There were also 3 stages of consent, and all of the contributors had the questions a week before filming. We offered counselling after the interviews to any of the contributors who requested it or needed it. And we also make sure that we consulted contributors about all the cuts and made any changes that were requested in the edits as well. Okay. So we've got some amazing contributors in these films, and we were really privileged to work with Seidman, presenter and comedian, who you may remember quite publicly resigned from his post last year as a radio DJ in response to a racial slur being used on the BBC News. Lisa Holdsworth, screenwriter, chair of the Writers Guild. Fozia Khan, Channel 4 commissioning editor. Liana Stewart, fantastic documentary producer and director. Sean McAllister, Sundance Film Festival winner, film producer, director. Corey Brotherson, games writer, currently co-creating an amazing game called The Windrush Tales. Esther Yemaya, a broadcast journalist, early career, fantastic. Sally Ogden, a documentary producer and director. And Sally Ogden is also the director for Industry Voices film series. Nick Ransom, early career TV researcher. Leah Magoya, a games writer, and Sam Frey, at the time a diversity scheme manager. And we're really, really lucky to have Sam giving a keynote later today. The contributors were absolutely phenomenal, and they are at the heart of the series. And I can't thank them enough for trusting the project and in us as a team, as a collective, to get these films out there. I'm going to screen this short film now, but I want to recognise that the content might be difficult for some of our delegates here today, and so I want to provide a content warning. The film is 20 minutes long, so I've practiced with the tech 3 times now without issue. But I do recognise that, you know, technology can be difficult at times and can be testing. So what I've done is I've put a link to the film in the chat. If you do experience any technical problems with your broadband, please do watch the film on the chat link. and I will see you in 20 minutes, but obviously I'm going to screen share it here. So I'm going to start screening that film now. Okay, thank you.
Just know when you do us wrong, you might trend. That's it.
I've just had someone feed back on you and say you're very northern. What does that mean?
I was slightly in front of my colleague and he said, "Oi, Rosa, get to the back of the bus."
I don't wake up every day thinking about being working class. Do you think posh people wake up thinking every day about being posh?
I suddenly felt very aware of my race. Felt like I was walking around with a label on my head.
Being a mother and being in this industry, you could just laugh, to be honest, because it's like, what's the point?
There are glass ceilings that are piled upon glass ceilings, especially if you're not white straight male.
I'm not pretending to be somebody else anymore just to fit in.
I could draw a very straight line between having spoken up about things and then no longer having a job.
Yes, you can look fine on the outside, and yes, you can look normal, but actually behind the scenes and personally and privately, domestically, you can be struggling.
People would make fun and be nasty about them. In fact, one person said my food smelled like dog food.
There aren't many people like me.
There's not many people like me. There are not that many people like me.
There's not many people like me.
There aren't many people like me.
There's not enough people like me.
I don't know anybody like me.
There aren't many people like me.
There are not very many people like me.
No, there's not many people like me.
I don't think there's a lot of people like me.
If you can find another 5, I'll give you a tenner.
I was born in Jamaica. In my lifetime, I've walked down the road to collect water. I lived that. When I first came to the UK, I lived in Ipswich in my primary school. Other students felt my skin to see what it felt like. They had never been around a black person before.
I'm Leeds born and bred. I went to a really ordinary comprehensive school. I was the first woman in my family to go to university.
I'm from Cardiff. I'm from a little place called Butte Town, otherwise known as Tiger Bay. I'm mixed race, so my dad is from Jamaica and my mum is Chinese, Bayesian and white, and so I'm ticking all the boxes here.
I grew up in a Catholic family with 6 sisters. I'm the only boy and a very working class, I suppose. My dad was a factory worker.
We grew up in a council estate, huge amount of racism in those early days. I think we were quite sort of typical of immigrant family, really.
I've always lived in the same area, which is in Chapeltown in Leeds. To me, it was a beautiful place, but to other people, Chapeltown can be seen as gangs, drugs, the ghetto, police.
I was born in Birmingham. I was absolutely adamant in becoming a writer, so I focused all my energy into doing that.
I'm a proud Bradfordian. I'm from Yorkshire. I love being from the north.
I was born here, but we grew up in Kenya. Came back here, I went to school in Bristol.
We grew up in Leeds. It was really nice. I grew up with all my grandparents, my aunties and uncles. We were working class, but I don't think I ever realised we were.
I was growing up in what most people might describe as the most stereotypical media upbringing. I was white, I was male, I grew up in Surrey, I was from the south, I spoke proper. A lot of people are stunned when I say, oh yeah, I'm autistic and I'm gay.
I absolutely adore the fact that it's so creative.
I've always felt really, really lucky to work in the television industry. I've met some of the nicest, most creative, brilliant people.
I like that the industry offers people the opportunity to express themselves.
It allows you a platform to tell stories that are really important that you might not be able to tell otherwise.
You can go from idea to broadcast, and something that you've made will be shown to millions of people.
Oh, how long have you got?
It's very difficult to not look away when you ask that question.
Oh.
You'd constantly want to be funded, you'd constantly want to be respected, you'd constantly want to be working, and all of those 3 things you're usually not, or it feels like that really.
We're still rife with people getting jobs on a nod and a wink, and I think that has such a stifling effect on diversity and equality.
I do feel like the industry expects a specific type of person that I'm not.
What makes me angry is that we're having to have these conversations. Why is representation such an issue for people to understand?
My biggest issue with the TV industry is that it's not inclusive. We're the media. We are meant to represent the country, and as far as I'm concerned, the people making TV really don't match the people who are watching it.
Did you say that if you're black, you have to be, you know, twice as good?
I've always had to work so much harder and always had to be excellent, nothing less than.
I don't want anything extra for me, but I feel like I have to work twice as hard.
You end up having to make sure that you don't make mistakes. You need to work harder, you need to be better than everybody else in there.
Straight away you are seen as this, you're just not white. You have to work 10 times harder.
I don't want to pass down advice to another generation to tell them that they have to work twice as hard to get half as far.
When you're from a working class background and you're starting out in TV, it's quite unforgiving. I thought people could see my poverty.
Having kind of navigated myself for 30 years with the industry, I've got used to the fact that there aren't many working class people in the industry.
It's not always been easy, being very working class, but trying to fit into a very middle class world.
Sometimes I feel really inadequate when I'm in situations because although I'm an intelligent woman, my life experience is different from others. The things that I enjoy are different from others. So if we're having a group conversation and they're talking about really highbrow things that I didn't access as a child, or like networks I didn't access, I find that quite intimidating.
I think I felt a lot of shame about who I was, being working class, coming from a family where, you know, my parents didn't speak English. I think I did pretend to be someone I wasn't for a long time.
You know, you can throw a stone at Broadcasting House and you'd have a hard time meeting somebody working class who, you know, wasn't behind a desk. I do get notes back, wonderfully authentic, and you still live in the north, how marvellous.
It's a competition really for space, for storytelling, and I'm not sure that the working class are winning really.
Everybody said the same thing, which is you will not get work in Yorkshire, because I don't think people consider regional work to be real work.
Just being back in Hull now, you feel it, the poverty of ambition because of where you are. You never really believe you can get out of that factory. You never really believe you can get out of that city.
It's not always easy being regional and northern and having a very northern accent.
I definitely feel like I have received a regional battle and thought to myself, maybe if I just learned a London accent. I feel like I'd be way further along in my career right now if I had a London accent.
It's definitely difficult to get your foot in the door. It's more if you know someone who can get you in.
Especially in this region, I've said before that we're at least 20 years behind. If we don't start working urgently, then it's just going to get worse.
I think mental health has been something that I've struggled with when I'm out of work and when I'm chasing my next contract. That's always been really hard in the sense that if I didn't have that focus, if I didn't have that routine, I'd develop OCD.
It's something I never spoke about. Like, I've never spoke to my colleagues about it. My boss knows because she's always backed me. I just saw it as yet another weakness that was better to hide.
Right now, I am technically a freelancer. It does weigh heavily on you mentally. It's very isolating. You can feel very alone.
It's a pick me situation. It's a please pick me situation in the media industry, and that can be very, very taxing. And of course, it affects your mental health and makes you worry.
Not to feel like you can speak to someone about what's really going on, you know, what you're going through personally is really difficult, but that's what the system is like. It doesn't allow you to be vulnerable.
The biggest challenge for me in my industry, if I'm going to be totally honest, has been being a working mum. That has been by far the biggest challenge.
Family means everything to me. Like, I'm a single mum of 4. I can't build our wealth. I can't do the things other people do. Like, we can't go on holiday. You know, we can't go shopping. Just basic things like that.
Being a mother and being in this industry, you could just laugh, to be honest, because it's like, what's the point? And I know that might sound really negative, but a lot of jobs are full time.
Once you start to have a family and then you try to do that kind of job while juggling childcare and all of that kind of stuff, it's difficult and it is a pressure.
I don't want to be strong. I don't want to be a strong single black mother. I don't want to do that. I want to be very weak and cry.
I worry about being stereotyped all the time. It's always there. I've grown up with it. You know, my personal experience being that, like, oh, this is a black game, so let's get the black guy to talk about it. Then you're now forced into a catch-22 situation. You may necessarily want to be truthful about the game because it's harmful and it's got stereotypes in it, but you also know in being truthful about the game that you may be ostracized, you may be pushed aside, you may be put in a situation where it's going to damage your entire career.
I just want to be able to say that a spade is a spade, that the sky is blue, if that is indeed the case, as opposed to having to be like, well, will I be seen as an angry black woman? Will I be seen as too sensitive? Do I have to work harder because they might think that because I'm a parent, I'm playing that single parent card?
If you don't extra smile as a black person, somebody might think that you're aggressive. It's the being super duper overly nice just to be seen as regularly nice so that everybody can walk away and say, oh, he was actually nice. Is that why is there an actually there?
I feel like when you work on something and they say, oh, you can't wear your hair like that, it'll attract attention. That's when people are trying to deny your culture a little bit. Like, I get it in some instances. Actually, I don't understand why I would have to be told not to wear my hair as an afro for a job. That's a bit weird, isn't it?
I remember once I had my hair in single braids, which is what a lot of black women do with their hair. Straight away, it was like a massive thing within the office and everyone's trying to touch it and pull it and how do you do it and stuff like that.
Some of the comments I used to get were just awful. Being likened to Medusa, you know, people touching my hair. It wasn't pleasant.
I've been doing some work for an American production company. The American producer came back to me and said, I've just had someone feed back on you and say you're very northern. What does that mean? And I realised that for him, northern was just geographical. Well, I live in the north, but actually what I realised what that other producer meant was probably that I was working class.
I think as I moved up and I, wanted to direct, I felt like being a woman was, a barrier. I could see all the boys around me directing and sort of being told, oh, but we see you more as a producer.
This industry's crying out for female directors. Same old phrase about women just being brilliant producers and organisers, and therefore you're not encouraged as much with the technical side.
I want to be a director. Everyone's telling me you have to be a producer, you have a vagina.
I have never made one, but I have received them. So in my voluntary position as chair of the Writers Guild, I think I was pretty blinkered about the realities of what was going on in the industry. But since I've been involved with the Guild, I've heard some truly appalling stories.
I have never made a formal complaint because I'm too afraid to do anything of the sort.
I did once try and make a formal complaint and I was basically told that I was a liar. So that's as far as it went.
I wouldn't say I've ever made a formal complaint, but I've made my position clear.
I made a formal complaint and it was costly. It did essentially cost me my job. But you don't overtly lose it. Slowly work gets taken away. You're no longer CC'd into emails or invited to meetings, and then suddenly your job performance isn't very good, and in spite of the fact you're like, well, I can't know something you didn't tell me. I could draw a very straight line between having spoken up about things and then no longer having a job.
Any complaint within the industry, I've never seen it work ever, and I've heard of many over the years when people complain about this and that. 18,000 people complained through emails and the right way, and that didn't do nothing. But as soon as something's a trending topic on Twitter, now it's like, yo, we need to do something about this.
The very first time I experienced racism in TV, I was working as a runner in a studios, and we had these trolleys where we would deliver tea and toast to the edits. I was slightly in front of my colleague and he said, "Oi, Rosa, get to the back of the bus." And I was so shocked, I didn't say anything. And another colleague, this little blonde, beautiful white girl, said, "That's racist. You shouldn't say that." And he was like, "Oh, it's only a joke." I told them that this person was racist and he got promoted. So it teaches me that you just don't say anything. That was the first and last time I reported anything to do with race.
Valued by who?
I've at times felt very valued and very secure and very supported.
Sometimes I feel like my voice is valued, I really do, and it's those times that you live for.
I do feel like my word is valued when it's listened to, but I think getting people to listen is often very hard.
At times I felt disillusioned and unhappy.
But most of the time I don't, you know, most of the time what gives me the strength to carry on is the people I'm filming.
I don't really feel like my voice is valued in this industry, I have to be honest.
I wouldn't say I feel valued by the mainstream media.
I don't believe my voice would necessarily be heard.
Your voice isn't necessarily accepted.
I don't feel valued.
No, I've never felt valued by the industry.
The importance of somebody's voice now is how many people are going to listen to it or watch it. And I think that's the question that television unfortunately asks before it decides whose voice is going to be heard.
I think the most important thing about the whole Black Lives Matter and everybody discussing it, it was important that they did that, because I don't know how anybody else feels, but I felt a real relief that other people were saying it and that I wasn't going mad. It wasn't just me.
With the current climate, you'd think that things have changed. They haven't. They've just changed on the surface for everyone who's looking in. We're doing this for diversity, we're doing that. I'm not seeing it.
It took a man's death, but the message, the voice and the importance of what's going on with us got massively amplified, and I don't think this is the time to be quiet and let the window of opportunity be missed.
Unfortunately, it's taken us too long to get there, of men, of white people, of people of privilege, to understand what constitutes harassment, a discriminatory act, a microaggression, to understand how that makes a workplace unbearable for people and makes a career unpursuable for someone. We are coming to a better understanding. We've still a hell of a long way to go.
The industry's never held accountable for the prejudice and racism that it often gives out.
Diversity schemes are often window dressing, essentially, to be like, look how many brown and black people we've got around, young ones, we're helping, but they never progress.
I wish diversity schemes didn't exist. I know that makes me a hypocrite because I run one and I'm always championing them to people. But if we had an industry that was already diverse and already thought about the people that they wanted to be in it, then we wouldn't need them.
I started my career 10 years ago and I've seen one black person who's a commissioner. That's a decade and one person to look up to.
I'm the token piece to make you feel like representation is happening, but behind the camera, it's very much not. And I'm just one person, but because I might have a big voice, it might make you feel like it's happening greatly, but it's not. The trick just works wonderfully. And it's definitely something I feel like needs to change.
We've got to the stage where we've admitted there's a problem. I think it has to be understanding that room has to be made, that expecting there to be this weird trickle up effect where if we get a few runners who are black or working class or have a disability, there will at some point be Director General of the BBC. That's going to take generations.
I did the Assistant Commissioner's scheme. It was brilliant and like such an amazing experience. But it took a long time for me to convince myself to do it, because I thought, well, I'm an exec. I should just be given a commissioning job if they want me. Why should I have to do a scheme? Like, none of my white colleagues have to do a scheme. I'm really experienced.
I think there needs to be better recruitment at the top. I'd like to see black, Asian and disabled commissioning editors across the broadcasters. That could happen tomorrow.
I think it should start down below. I'd like to find ways of training working class people in community centres, try to do work in northern cities, find people with possibilities and have scholarships in place where they can progress.
Paid placements are amazing. Expecting people to work for free all day long just to get into this industry is just not okay.
There should be something else in place for black people, especially considering that the whole of the Ofcom board is white people.
I think unless people are named and shamed, I can't see how this industry is going to change.
If there's going to be a decision or a ruling on whether something is wrong that affects the black community, You need a black board. You need a board of black. If there's going to be something that affects the Asian community, you need a board that has Asian people. An open letter is written by that board. That gets shared by every member of the board, whether it's Stormzy, whether it's a John Boyega, whether it's a Idris Elba. Now you're creating a media storm every single time that we've been disrespected to a level.
You have to make it less dog eat dog.
Look at why a lot of us are leaving and try and find out how you can keep us here.
There are a lot of announcements, a lot of schemes, a lot of this and that. But I think the work has to go into just doing it, you know, actually just recruiting people.
It is an industry which is trying to accept the fact that the world is changing.
I think it can change, you need the right people to do it, and it needs to be the people behind the scenes for sure.
It always comes down to who's got the power, and until that changes, it's not going to change.
We need to stop sitting around in rooms and saying, someone should do something, and we need to find the person who's going to do something.
I don't know the way forward. I just know what I won't do is wait.
You know, in 10, 20 years, we'll look back on this year and go, wow, you know, we've achieved a lot since then.
I hope this time in 5 years, 10 years, we don't have to be talking about the next scheme. We're just talking about the next amazing person.
Have the vibe of tomorrow this could change, and that's just how I'm rolling with it.
Okay, I'm going to stop the screen share there. So I hope colleagues found the film and stories generative and thought-provoking. And I think now that Mita, Ahmet, Brian and I are going to go back into a panel for the last 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. Thank you for that. That was a really great film. I don't know how everyone else feels. There's a lot of thanks coming in, Beth, in the chat as well. That's really great. I find that quite a lot of I think some of the things that we were saying in terms of media education is also coming through in the film as well. You know, things at the top need to change. Even and then, you know, coming down, why was, I forgot the name of the commissioner, sorry, but you know, why did they have to go through extra training for just for the same position that their colleagues were getting?
Yeah, Fazia Khan.
Yeah, and I wonder if there's I think that there's similar things maybe within education as well, that the students of colour, students with disabilities might have to kind of do extra, read more, watch more films, add more to their productions in order to kind of get the same grade as maybe there is this, I don't know, there's this unconsciousness within the faculty in terms of when it comes to grading as well. We've got about 8 minutes. I don't know if we want to, if people want to put comments and questions in the chat, please do so. But Ahmet, Brian, if you'd like to kind of come in, you know, talk about the film. I don't know where Brian's gone actually. But Ahmet, if you would like to come in as well.
Sure, Beth, that was amazing, and I wish there was a scholar faculty version of the film, so we can actually tune in and understand the inner workings and how people are feeling isolated or siloed in some of the things that we do. But absolutely, I think we see the same trends not only in the industry but in education sector as well. It's pretty much, I think, across the board. It doesn't matter if you're in the UK or in the US. The experiences are very much similar. Access definitely is an issue, and also who is performing the gatekeeping, right? Who are the bodies letting into the discussion or to the productions or to the education system, and who are not. And as you know, what some of the some of the folks in the film was talking about, if you express any kind of objection or resentment or even opinion about challenging the power, you became the angry person of your workplace. Angry woman, angry Black woman, angry gay person, angry immigrant, you name it. So you become that person that they don't want to deal with. So I think that's very striking, but very similar, I think, in education.
Beth, we've had a question for you come in from Marion Mayer. You mentioned that you had follow-up conversations with the people in the film. Can you tell us a bit about how they felt about contributing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for the question. And Ahmet, I absolutely, the ways in which, the crossover between these issues and, education, and the industry is absolutely incredibly striking. But yeah, in terms of conversations with people leading up to the filming, those conversations were really important, actually, to the sort of method and to the research, and they were also really important for humane reasons, because ultimately, despite the fact that people have been immensely honest and brave in these films, it's still a risk, and we recognise that these were made with the industry, for the industry, and they are being seen in the industry by people, a lot of people, but also a lot of people very high up. It was really, really important that they felt comfortable to do that, and that they recognised the risks also, because, we can't take those away, but we wanted to be really honest, about those risks. But it was a particularly traumatic year last year for so many reasons, and we also wanted to ensure that that the industry professionals who were going to speak out felt supported, and that they wanted to do that, because it was just so, and remains, so triggering, so difficult for so many people, particularly, following the murder of George Floyd, that was really important, that people there felt absolutely comfortable. And there were two people who I won't name, but who wanted to contribute, but who, after the second conversation, were both early career, unsurprisingly, and decided that they couldn't take this forward. And we absolutely supported that decision, and actually, said, okay, that this is horribly sensible, because they just didn't feel safe to put themselves out there. Obviously, as you can see, we tried to get a range of career levels and roles and experience, but in particular, early career people. It was such a big risk for early career industry people to put themselves out there, and we wanted to acknowledge that.
Brilliant, thanks, Beth. Brian, we've got you back. Do you want to kind of come in on and your thoughts about the film and how it might resonate with kind of things that we've talked about in our part of the session? You're on mute, Brian. That's going to happen quite often, I think.
Yeah, apologies. Yeah, you think with all this online teaching I've been doing for the last year that I wouldn't have made that silly mistake. But yeah, thanks, Mita. Yeah, I think the film's firstly, hugely powerful, and I think, really quite disturbing, in as much that you kind of like you look at that and you hear those voices, and yeah, it's really hard, isn't it? It's really hard because, I've obviously got students that have gone into the media industry from A level. They've gone to university, or they may have gone and followed a vocational route and gone into the media industry. And they come back and they talk to my students, and there are a variety of kind of like different voices, obviously, that come back from that. But at the same time, I wonder how many of those students who are from you know, different backgrounds and genders and religion, etc. How many of those are kind of like, in a way, almost frightened to kind of tell that real experience that we've just not been able to see on film, which is disturbingly refreshing. But at the same time, I wonder how many people are, especially, you know, almost that suffering in silence. And it's really made me think about reaching out to those ex-students of mine, you know, to give them that support, say, you know, if you need a conversation, if you need to speak. And because I don't think sometimes that they're obviously not given the platforms and stuff like that, you know, that the people on film were in that respect, and brave enough to kind of have those, that, you know, to be able to speak on those platforms. So it really does make you think about how, you know, how people are feeling and how they are in industry. Because you, in a way, sometimes I think there's an assumption that people are getting on really well. And I was talking to you, Mita, about one of my students who's been editing Call the Midwife, he's doing brilliantly well. But I was thinking about this the other day. I was thinking he's freelance. Now, I know a lot of media professionals are freelance, but then, you know, looking at those films, then I was thinking to myself, well, you know, he's a black male, and is he freelance because he chooses to be freelance? Is it because the nature of the industry, or is there something else then that I've missed and not made the connection or not realized? And, you know.
Oh, I think we might have lost Brian.
Yeah, looks like
I think we have, but So, well, I'm going to wrap up now anyway, because we're out of time for this session. Thank you so much to my co-panelists, Ahmet and Brian. If you are still there and you can still hear me, thank you to Beth for the screening as well. Thank you to Julian for inviting me to and giving me this space, scary as it is, to kind of come and talk about this. I hope that we've given some insight into our experiences and how we might be able to kind of be the change that we want to be. I know that's a really cliched word. I can't believe I've just said it myself. But yeah, let's kind of keep talking and let's get diverse, people. And that's all from me. Am I Chris or Julian? I'm not sure who I'm handing back to.
Well, shall I just come in with some follow up that amazing panel and really important conversation and fantastic screening? I'll follow it up with some really boring and mundane housekeeping, which is very much in character. So we are going to be using breakout rooms